Hi everyone, this is Roger from Flowable speaking. In this short video I would like to give you a brief introduction into the Flowable event registry. We will see how we can use and create event models to model our events and how we can use tasks within BPMN and CMMN models to send out events and to receive events. We will do this for now all internally within Flowable. In a second part of the series, we will then see how we can use channel models too to send out events to other systems. The event registry is used for asynchronous communication with external systems. We see here a diagram how this works and how this compares to asynchronous communication. So on the left side, we have the usual synchronous communication as we normally have it with HTTP, REST APIs, SOAP APIs, and such things. We have a process A or system A if you want to, and a process B. And what now happens is that system A calls for system B, and it does that, for example, via HTTP, and of course it waits then. It waits until process B prepared the answer back to that call, and when that happens, when system B or process B sends back the answer, then process A can continue with its work. While process B is preparing the answer, process A is basically just waiting and doing nothing. This is of course totally fine. If the answer comes very fast, it doesn't matter, and probably we anyway need the answer to continue. Asynchronous communication, on the other hand, works differently. Again, we have process A and process B. And process A calls out to process B, but as you can see, process A can continue its work while process B is preparing the answer. So it can continue just the work it wants to do, and at some point, process B will just provide the answer to that call back to process A, and process A will probably pick it up at some point later then, but it is already there and received. Asynchronous communication is usually used together with some infrastructure like a Kafka server or a IBM MQ messaging system, or it can be any JMS queue actually here to do the communication. So how do we model such a asynchronous communication now in Flowable? What our plan is going to be is to create actually two different models. One is a BPMN process model that will send out an event, and another CMMN case model that will receive an event. In between, we then have the channel that does the transmission of the event for us. At the moment, as mentioned, we will just use an internal channel to do that transmission, but later on we will then use the channel models to actually call an external messaging infrastructure that does the transmission of the event for us. Now let's have a look how we model that in Flowable design. I already prepared the models so that we do not have a lot of work to do. We just have the customer send process here, and what that does is in a first task it gathers some customer data. Let's have a short look on the form that we have there. So we have a customer identifier, a customer ID, we have a customer name, a short checkbox to see if the customer is active, basically a boolean then in the backend. And we have a customer description also as a text field. On the other hand, we have our customer case, basically the case model, the CMMN model that is then receiving our customer creation event. Not a lot of things here, just a simple task that is actually a new customer. So that task should be created as soon as a new customer gets created by the process. And it will just display then our customer information also in a form Like we have here the received customer name, received customer description, and the Boolean that we have to see if the customer is active. So back to the send process now, and we now want to implement our actually data event sending. Let us use the send event task now to send out an event. As you can see here in the activities pane of the toolbar, we have several tasks here that are for the events. As mentioned already, the send event task that we use to send out events. We have the opposite to that for processes, that is to receive event task. And we have some special task actually that is doing both. That is then basically if you want to kind of asynchronous communication based on asynchronous infrastructure. We need that special type of event to prevent any running conditions when we use sending out and receiving events in a very short time. Let us use now that send event task. I just place it here within the model. Send event task, and here I can basically define two different things. One is the outbound event, the other one is the outbound channel. Let's first check the outbound event and what that is. I'm going to create that now, and it's going to be our customer event. We call it like this. I'm going to create that, and we can then check how that looks like. So we basically directly came into the event model for that event, and here we're now able to define how our event looks like. So what's the payload of that event? What's the data that is in there? So let's add some fields here. As you can see, I can define the field name, the type of the field for that event, and some additional checkboxes like, is this a header, is this a full payload, is this a correlation ID, we will check that later, or is it just metadata. Good, first field we're going to create is a simple ID that is a string, and I'm going to mark that as our correlation ID. Next field we have is a name for the customer, simple string. Then we have a field called active. That is a Boolean and defines if our customer is an active customer. Saving that. And last but not least, I'm going to add another string that is just a simple description. Going to save that too. There we have it. That's our payload for the event. Now back to the process. We're going to save that. And we're going to configure our new outbound event configuration. This is now basically a mapping table between the variables that we have within the process and the event payload that we have, the fields that we have on the event. We use that to basically decouple the process from the actual event that is sent out. So here we have to define what from the process that we want to use as the event ID. So we have some expressions here to use. So the dollar sign and curly braces. And we basically use here on the root of our process the field that is called customer ID, like this. Same for all the other fields. I'm doing some copy paste here. So the next one is the customer name. We have the customer active field, and we have the description that we wanted to use. We're going to save that. As you can see, this corresponds with the fields that we have on our data gathering form here. So customer ID, customer name, etc. Good. Back to our send event task. The next step would now be to define a outbound channel. But because we said this is basically a first example and we do not have any messaging infrastructure ready so far, we will just do that flowable internally. We just send that event from the process to the case with the flowable internal event bus, and therefore we just click that, we just check that checkbox here to use the internal channel to send that event. We save that then all, and this is it, our process. Next part will then be the receiving part, so we will switch to our case CMMN model. We will now implement in our case model a listener to listen to the incoming event that has been sent out by our process. You will find that element here within the listener palette that we can just drag and drop it into our model here, and I'm going to connect it with a entry criterion Sentry to my task, so that whenever that event comes in, then that task new customer will be activated. On that element, we now have basically the same as we had before when we were sending out the event, where we had an outbound event and an outbound channel. We have here an inbound event and an inbound channel. So for the inbound event, we're just going to use exactly the same event model as we've defined it earlier. So I'm going to say I want to reference a existing model, and there I find my customer event that I could just reference here, and this is now set on our event listener. I also have now the inbound event configuration that is basically also the opposite of the outbound event configuration. When I open that here, you will see that we have these two parts. We have correlation parameters. We will see what that is later, actually. And we have the data mapping. So this is basically the same as we had it for the process where we send out the event, where we wanted to decouple the information on the process from the event, the information that is stored on the event. Here now we have the information stored on the event on the left side, and here we define to what fields that we want to map this information as soon as it comes in to our case. So what we give here is the name of the variables where we want to store that information. These are new variables. They're going to get created as soon as the event comes in. So this is no expression that we need here. We just give the name. So let's give the names here. Going to use a received name. And some copy paste. We have a received active. And we have a received description. Notice how I did not map the ID field here from the event. We're going to use that later for the correlation ID, as we will see. Okay, let's hit the OK button here to save that. Actually, what you can notice is also that we did not define an inbound channel. We just leave that empty. Inbound channel is as soon as we wanted to get a message or event from an external system like a Kafka or IBM MQ. But here we're just using the internal event channel, so we can leave that free. Flowable will automatically recognize that event as soon as it is sent out. What we can check is that on that task here, when we check the form, we will see that we have exactly the names that we've defined for the variables in here, so that we can then see that information on that task form as soon as this event comes in here. Very well. Last thing to do, save everything and then deploy it to Flowable work. Let's try that out. Deploying is as easy as hitting this button here. I'm going to do that. Publishing to Flowable work. Successful. So we can now switch to Flowable work and create new processes or cases here. Let's create some work here. And as you can see, we have both of them. We have our customer send process and our customer receive case. I will create one of each. So one of the process and another one of the case. And as you can see on the process, we already have our gather data task that will provide us the possibility to provide the customer data. And on the receive case, we do not have any task so far. We expect to have a task here. It will be activated as soon as we receive the event. Let's start with the send process. I'm going to go to the task here to enter the data. Here we have our customer form. Let's give it a ID, a customer name. I'm going to activate that customer, and I'm going to give a description here for that customer. I will now complete that, and it should send out our event. So far, so good. The customer send process has been completed. And let's now see what we have on the receive case. Finally, yeah, we have our task that has been created. A new customer has been created. We can go there, and there we see on the appropriate form for that task the exact information that we now have sent from the process to that case, and it is now displayed with that task. So far so good, everything's working, but yeah, let's see a little flaw that we still have. I'm going to create actually now again a send process, and I'm going to create two receive cases at the same time. Very well. Again, I'm going to enter the data like before. And let's see what happens with the cases. So I'm going to complete that, and I'm going to check the two cases that we have now. We see the first case that I've created, yeah, got the customer. Fine enough. The second case got the customer too. So both of the cases actually got the customer. I mean, depending on your use case, that might be correct, but usually what we want is kind of that just one specific case reacts to a specific event that comes in. And that is now when we're going to use the correlation ID that I already mentioned. So we have to adapt our model a little bit to provide kind of an address for our event so that only specific cases will react to a specific event. Let's do that. Back in Flowable Design, I'm going to adapt our case model here. In fact, I'm going to add to the case plan model directly a start form. I'm going to call that the customer receive start form, like this. Short typo here. And I'm going to create that form, and I'm going to add a few text fields here, basically a name field to give our case a name. That's just for visibility then in Flowable work. And the next text field I'm going to add is the receiver ID. So that's basically the address of our case now, this ID, and we want only to listen to events that use the specific receiver ID here. So far so good. I'm going to save that. And then I need to adapt now our mapping for the customer event. So back to the process in here. What I'm going to do, I'm going here to the configuration of our inbound event. And you remember that we actually marked our ID on the event as a correlation type data field. That's why that field is now popping up here under the correlation parameters that we have here. And in here we can now define, okay, what should match to that ID here that we have in the event, the field called ID, what should it match to as a receiver address, so to say. So we can add here exactly that information. It's again going to be a expression. You see some examples above here how you can add that. So in our example, we will just call that on our case instance the field receiver ID. That's exactly the field that we've created in the start form just a few seconds ago. So that's going to be the mapping field that addresses our case. Very well. Hitting that OK, saving again, and publishing everything to Flowable Work. Let's see how that works now. In Flowable Work, let us create again the usual customer send process that we have, and again 2 instances of the customer receive cases. And as you now can see, we need to provide additional information here to create that case. That's exactly the start form that we've created a few seconds ago. So let's give a name here. Let's say receiver 01, and we give the receiver ID. That's the address of the case actually now, and we give that receiver 001. Submit that. Let's create the second one. That is, of course, the receiver 002 with a receiver ID 002. Very well. When we go to the send process, we need now to provide the data and, of course, here the customer ID. So you remember that is exactly now the ID that is going to be added to the event as the correlation ID and will then use to match up with the appropriate case with the same receiver ID. So here 001, let's call that Acme again, is active, and as a description again Acme is 001. I'm going to complete that case and see what happens. On receiver 001, we now see that the event came in, that we actually have a new customer task, and we can totally see the information that we got here for that case. What about receiver 002 that in the earlier version was also addressed, but now, as we can see, now no task here. So that case didn't seem to feel responsible for that event, which is of course exactly what we've modeled. Let's just for test create a second send task, a send process, customer send process. And here I'm now going to add the 002 customer ID so we can address that receiver 02 also. Again, just giving some arbitrary name here like Acme 002 and see what happens. Now, if that works, now we go to receiver 002 and there again, now it has been correctly addressed and only that specific case now reacted to the event that was coming in. So that's basically the idea of the correlation ID, that you can really address then specific instances of receivers. Can it be a case or can it be a different process or whatever it is? So that's it for this part of the tutorial. What we've learned is how to use send event tasks and receive event tasks or listeners to send out or receive events from within our BPMN and CMMN models. What we also learned is how to model events and their payload that are actually defining the structure and the information that is contained in an event. And finally, we've learned to use correlation IDs to address specific instances of the receiving cases or processes that events should be sent to. What we've not covered so far are the channels. That will be part now of the next video. Channels will be used to implement then specific products, messaging products like Kafka or IBM MQ. And we're going to check out some of these, check out how the channel model has to be implemented to communicate with these. And we will then finally send real messages, not just only within Flowable, but also around to the external systems and back to Flowable again. Thanks very much for the interest in Flowable, and remember, keep your work flowable.